how can I connect with my erotic self as a woman, but I also have this chance to be in a child space?
If you're a writer, this podcast will blow your mind. I had the distinct privilege of speaking with Dr. Ming Holden, an award-winning writer who wrote sections of her memoir in different parts of the world, from Africa to Siberia to Europe, and yes, even in a war zone in Syria. So we speak about that and many other things. We speak about life, about geography and writing, about recovering from trauma. Ming is an inspiring human being. I'm really privileged to know her. And now, on to the podcast. Where are you in the world?
I am outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I've more or less been for exactly a year. I think it was the 14th of March that I flew to New Mexico to pick up my cats in my car at my parents' house. They retired out here. And I just kind of stayed. My childhood bed was in the living room as a day bed. So I went to sleep on it and have been doing so for 365 days now. Where are you?
Wow. I'm in London, but Santa Fe, New Mexico. I remember driving south on 26 from Colorado and just going through and seeing this landscape. It was otherworldly. I mean, what is it like to be in an environment? You've traveled, I don't know how many countries all over the world, and the geography. What's
But
that?
you have also traveled all over the world. It's very
Yeah,
clear.
but I wonder how the geography around you has affected. Okay, barring the COVID pandemic BS that we're all dealing with, I wonder if you're able, because of the geography and the environment, you've discovered new ways of either thinking or writing, or discovering new ways of inhabiting the world, being
Yeah. I hope every person who has ended up somewhere they didn't expect this year, which I think is all of us, has found new ways of being. I think mine.
Where are you in the world?
I am outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I've more or less been for exactly a year. I think it was the 14th of March that I flew to New Mexico to pick up my cats in my car at my parents' house. They retired out here. And I just kind of stayed. My childhood bed was in the living room as a day bed. So I went to sleep on it and have been doing so for 365 days now. Where are you?
Wow. I'm in London, but Santa Fe, New Mexico. I remember driving south on 26 from Colorado and just going through and seeing this landscape. It was otherworldly. I mean, what is it like to be in an environment? You've traveled, I don't know how many countries all over the world, and the geography. What's that?
You have also traveled all over the world. It's very clear.
But I wonder how the geography around you has affected. Okay, barring the COVID pandemic BS that we're all dealing with, I wonder if you're able, because of the geography and the environment, you've discovered new ways of either thinking or writing, or discovering new ways of inhabiting the world, being there.
I hope every person who has ended up somewhere they didn't expect this year, which I think is all of us, has found new ways of being. I think mine relate to the desert insofar as I get a bloody nose almost every day. That's new. I have allergies. So in my reading videos, you might see that sometimes I have like a totally pink face, and I've taken Benadryl and I'm all loopy.
Is that the pollen? Is it the pollen?
Yeah, in particular, not juniper, it's chamisa, I think. Something
Really?
just really, because I grew up in Santa Barbara. I grew up in a different kind of climate. And I do miss the ocean out here, but I love remembering that deserts once were underwater, and that it's an ocean of air that you're walking through, a very dry
That's
air.
beautiful.
And I mean, I guess I'm afraid to say this because I know it might sound silly, but it feels like there are spirits here that are very strong. This was Apache land. It's obviously settled and stolen land. And the last essay of refuge deals with Tatacho and who's a mentor of mine and a Chumash native from the Santa Barbara County. And I met him when I was 14. I was still
Wow.
had braces and was really awkward. And he was my Aikido sensei. And he sort of, he told me later that it was basically because he knew I needed to soak up his teachings and that I was very like cerebral and concerned with getting into college. And, my parents both went to college out east. And so he found a way to get his knowledge into me. And that was by asking me when I was 20 and on a, spring break home from Brown, he said, Ming, when are we going to do our book? And I said, our book? And he goes, I have a message for the universe and you need to be the one to write it.
Wow.
So ever since we've been doing these oral history, wide ranging recorded, kind of like this, except without the camera. And we had to stop because he likes to do them in person. We've never tried to do something across the miles.
So there's a strong vibration there, and you've gleaned some wisdom from a native whose ancestors came from this part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, he's a member of the Chumash tribe, and I'm not really sure about the history between Chumash and Apache, but I mean, he taught me reverence. He taught me to think about, it really helps with the solitude of quarantine to think about trees and animals as people, right? And the rock people and the mountain people. And that's the sort of language that Chacho uses, which is a way, for Indigenous studies, if you want to get academic about it, to help decolonize the way that we experience the world. So this was a year-long opportunity to actually do that, to remind myself that I am never alone. And one time when I was really going through it, I'd been treated terribly by some guy in college, and then mom had to undergo open heart surgery. It was just one of those semesters. I remember getting home to Chacho for our conversations and telling him, for the first time, I don't know if I want to be here. I don't know if I want to be me. There was just so much sadness, and I was still really young. And he said, well, first of all, you're never alone. I said, what? He was like, you've got so many spirits who love you. They're like jostling for a better view of what you're doing.
Wow.
And it was pretty powerful by the time, I couldn't even drink legally yet. And here was this amazing man who had shown me a lot of fatherly love, telling me that there was an all-loving force, many forces that loved me very much, but it was out from under the idea of this God in the sky with the long white beard who is telling me to take my clothes off, right? That would never work. I take my clothes off all the time.
Yes, you do. And speaking of reading, like you mentioned earlier, you have an interesting habit, and on your Facebook page, which a lot of people can't now access because you've already maxed out the amount of photos.
No, yeah, that's fine. I mean, the misogynist trolls, they show their asses pretty soon, and so then I block them, and then I add new friends. But anyway, yeah, I think I told you this earlier, but I got to my parents' house, and it was supposed to be my post-PhD trip. Like I got my PhD in November of 2019. I traveled in Europe. I was really exhausted and sad. It was a PhD all about trauma studies. So it's like a big piece of life work, and I just needed to go cry on my friends' couches in Europe. And Europe is a wonderful place to be sad. I'm sure you know this. My last place that I was sad in Europe, or whatever, close by, was Oxford. So I got to my parents' house because I was going to pick up my cats in my car and then drive west and get a job. And I came here to pick up my cats in my car last March.
And you
exactly
had to stay put, essentially, because of
and then I never left. And the first night I was just in my parents' living room. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm lying in my childhood bed, which they were using as a day bed in the living room. And I looked up at the ceiling and I thought, oh God, I just got out of a couple of, really hurtful relationships with intimate partners who didn't treat me very well. I really want to keep healing. And everything I do is sort of about recovery and healing. And Chacho's and my conversations are always revolving around that too. He's a veteran who's a cancer survivor as well.
Wow.
He's been through it. And he's an Indigenous man in the United States. So he's got a ton of trauma. And the way that he lives is a sort of daily practice in recovery. And so I thought about it and I thought, well, what is it that I need? And I thought to keep recovering, to keep embodying myself as a woman, and to reconnect with my body and stuff. And what do I value? And that's community. I don't want to lose that. And we're all in our houses, but we have this amazing technology where we can see and hear each other.
Yeah.
And my mom is a first grade teacher, or,
Wow.
was for 40 years. Yeah. So she reads so well that sometimes her Christmas presents to us are just like cassette tapes of her reading George and Martha.
Love that. That's a beautiful
Yeah,
gift,
I get
actually.
that from mom. So I
Yeah.
just sort of sat there and I thought, how can I connect the fact that I want to reconnect with my erotic self as a woman, but I also have this chance to be in a child space in my head because I'm in my parents' house, right? I'm their
Right.
child now.
Yeah.
I always was, but I definitely feel that now because I'm sleeping on their couch.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of just thought, I've had a couple shots of whiskey. I'm feeling brave. I did figure modeling in college. I'll take off my shirt and read my friend's Goodnight Moon on Facebook Live. And that was
Amazing.
almost exactly a year ago. And
Wow.
hundreds of people, by the time the thing stopped, there would already have been 97 views or something. And then in the next few days, there would be a couple hundred more. And then I started getting like, thank you for the stories.
Mm.
So, especially when it's warm out here, it really is just so gorgeous. And it's a huge part of my well being to get outside every day.
Yeah.
So during the day, I'll wear clothes and I'll go on a walk with my cell phone and I'll put it in a tree and I'll read a children's story.
Wow. That's
And then
incredible.
at night, I'll take off my clothes and I'll read either my own stuff, or especially since June 2020, I've been doing some race history, race
Yeah.
theory. It
Yeah.
seems important, and I just got a doctorate, so I've got those books around,
Yes,
and it's been
exactly.
helpful, to read like the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, Roxana Dunbar Ortiz's book, which is
Yeah.
really incredible, with Zin.
Mhm.
Um, it takes longer than I thought it would to get through really any book that isn't a children's book, I've discovered. So I haven't even gotten to Zin yet, but it seemed most important to read Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States.
Especially while you're in that location, right?
Mhm.
It's really beautiful how you mentioned how the deserts are like used to be underwater, and there's like
Yeah.
an ocean of air, is what you said. It's beautiful. And I came across you because of the book you wrote, Refuge, and you won an award for a memoir award in 2016. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I was in the middle of two classes where I taught intro to acting as a theater grad student at UCSB. Just gorgeous, like right by the sea.
Yeah.
So between classes, I had 10 minutes. And so I would take 5 of the minutes and go outside and watch the ocean. And I just remember looking down, and I had submitted this thing for 2 years with no bites, and then in February I saw that Corey was having this memoir award, and Lydia Yuknevich was judging, and
Oh,
Lydia
wow.
Yuknevich embodies and is and writes so authentically. She is
Mm.
just extraordinary in what she's doing with the braided essay form and moving away from the academic format with corporeal writing and teaching classes through her own deal instead of at a university. I mean, just what she's doing is really fantastic. And how loving she is really important. So I just remember thinking like, oh, Lydia Yuknevich is judging it. And happily, I had always thought she was awesome, but never met her. So I could send in my stuff for the contest. And it was the last $25 I could afford to spend on a writing contest, and I really didn't expect very much at all, but I remember thinking, I'm gonna kick myself if I don't do this last one because
Yeah.
Lydia is judging it. And I
Yeah.
love her, I love who she is. And that was the time that I thought, instead of putting these essays in chronological sequence, I'm gonna do it just from my heart. I'm just gonna start with my heart, which is Rose, which is about figure modeling, but also about what is inside us.
Yeah. That
And
was a
then
beautiful
and then
memoir.
branch out, right, to Syria, and then to so I listened to a different progression in my head when I thought about the essays and how they were going to go, and I
Mm.
think that is as important as anything. Hi, Mom.
That's great. Say hi to your mom for me.
I think the most shameful thing, because I don't feel shame about reading in my underwear. What I do feel shameful about is that I watched fluff, like either puffy rom-coms
Yep.
or mysteries where British people figure out who murdered who.
Oh, yeah.
And I could not go there. My father's a member of the Academy, and he's a retired film editor, so he gets these screeners. And
Yeah.
this is the first year of my life that I haven't been like, where are the screeners? Let's watch the
Right.
movies.
Right. Right.
I'm not ready or I wasn't for a long
You know
time
what I
for the
just
vaccine.
watched? A series I
To
just
have
watched
feel
called,
it.
oh yeah. Yeah, yeah.
What
Well,
did you
it's
watch?
uh, I mean, I haven't sunk so low to go to Hallmark, but have you done the Hallmark trot here and there? You're a
Hallmark
romantic.
Tron?
Yeah, have you seen Hallmark films? You know the
No, but
Hallmark.
I do watch really bad Netflix
Yeah,
romances
like
with
have you seen
friends in
Virgin
San
River?
Diego.
Have you seen the Virgin River? Have you seen that one?
No, but I have heard of it from the friends with whom I watch the Puffy films. So
Yeah,
yeah.
there you go. So I've heard that one's a pretty rommy commie kind of thing going on. But yeah, that's nice.
I just,
I actually
you have to be ready to have feelings when you watch really well made films. That's
yeah,
all.
that's right. That's right. And even
I
just
wasn't sure if I had the emotional strength.
but speaking of like works of art, I read your book Refuge, and it's just astounding to me. I am familiar a bit with the memoir genre, and the way you weave in certain metaphors, and how there's one line in here at the beginning, because you were a model, and which sounded really sketch to me. I was like, okay, wait, she answered an advertisement when she was an undergrad at Brown University to go pose nude in a guy's basement. Okay, so that to me was like, okay, wait, okay, what are we going to find here in this set of stories? So it's fascinating in that regard. You're still alive, obviously, because you wrote it.
His name is Robin. He turned out to be very sweet. His
Oh,
basement was in fact very musty, and the whole thing did seem sketch, but um, not in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. It was
okay.
just an informal drawing group that this local art teacher had with his friends. They
Yeah,
were all middle-aged guys, but Robin had a daughter my age. I never met her, but he would tell me all about her. And
okay.
I didn't have a car, so he would come and pick me up on campus and drive me out there. And it was just one of those many experiences that are in the book where people would ordinarily expect something bad to happen. And I think part of why I'm still sort of a humanist, or a humanitarian at least, is that so often the worst did not happen. I think
Yeah.
I've spent a total of 3 years, I believe, living, on 4 different continents, really going outside what a lot of people in my age and demographic might describe as their comfort zone.
Right.
And if the worst had happened, I wouldn't have kept doing that, but it didn't. The worst thing, the sort of worst traumas in my life have been interpersonal and took
Right.
place almost entirely within American borders.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's
everywhere I
actually,
went was
a
ordinary
lot of
people.
countries in the world issue warnings, travel warnings, if you're heading to the United States, because it's unsafe, in certain parts of it. In fact,
Very, especially
crime
now.
crime is astronomical in comparison to Europe in general, compared to the United States. And it's really interesting too, I think, especially since post 9/11, there's been a dramatic drop in Americans traveling abroad, and that creates this isolationism, which is a kind of petri dish for this popularist,
Agree.
nationalist, these kind of
Yeah.
dangerous, but you've been, so what I was going to say is, like you, when I travel, uh, you oftentimes hear these stories full of fear, and but when you're on the ground in places that could be considered dangerous, you meet people. People are there. They're, especially in the Middle East, they'll give you a cup of tea and they want to know who you are. And
Yeah,
it's a
extraordinarily
different story.
generous and hospitable.
Yeah,
So much of their identity is bound up in being legendary hosts. So
absolutely.
everywhere I went, specifically in Syria, I couldn't go anywhere without being offered tea, even a refugee tent on the wrong side of the border, within Syria.
That's
And by then
amazing.
it was
You were in Syria. You were in Syria like when? Like during the whole
2013.
Assad?
So it was after, yeah, it was after the civil war began, and we had cut diplomatic
Why the
ties. So
hell would you go there? Like, I'm just curious, Ming. Like,
because by
seriously,
then
really answer that question. Why would you go there?
Oh, because I'm a little bit delusional and dissociative, and I just figure I'm the protagonist of a movie that ends well. If you don't have that fundamental narrative, then you're not going to go to scary places.
Yeah.
If I, for instance, like personally, I've struggled with anxiety, I've struggled with depression, but I've never struggled with anything on the OCD spectrum, you know, where you have intrusive thoughts about the worst that could happen. I only have that when I'm super interpersonally traumatized and I'm driving with my cats and I'm afraid they'll fall out of the car. You know, like
Yeah.
that's the worst it gets for
It's
me.
pretty,
Other
yeah.
than that, you know, I started traveling internationally and living internationally when I was 16, and I was in Ecuador for a summer. And I just remember I would just sort of look out the window at the banana trees going by and think, you know, daydream about good things. And then I sort of slotted that into always thinking about how I could write about what I was doing when I got older and became an adult and started doing this work abroad.
Yeah.
So, and I think the part of myself that writes, you know, is the part of herself of myself rather, with my head in the clouds, right?
Yeah.
So if I didn't have that, if I were right up here with the realities of how awful everything is, I would never leave my house, whether it was quarantine or not.
Yeah.
But the Syria thing specifically, I knew that I had a couple of followers who were prominent in the latter years of the Obama State Department.
Mm.
So I think what happened was that I wrote about the survival girls, and I wrote about development, and I that ended up in the Huffington Post, and that was when Ronan Farrow was working for Secretary Clinton,
Oh yeah.
opening her very first, actually the country's very first youth global affairs office. And I was working with traumatized youth in Kenya. I knew that he had also worked specifically with traumatized refugees in Kenya.
Right.
So when I decided that I was going to try a different model for a development project and not say exactly what I was going to do when I got there, but just know, you know, like I said earlier, if you know what your skill set is and you know what your values are, you can assess the environment that you're in and be as helpful as possible after getting a sense of the culture and the factors at work. So I wrote about how I didn't know what I was going to go do in Kenya. And then I wrote about how that led to this incredible life-changing experience, because instead of making these Congolese women who were very traumatized write, which they weren't comfortable with. I was supposed to be a creative writer, but they asked if we could do drama. So they wrote a script, and then they wanted me to direct them. And I said, do you mean direct you? And then they made this incredible piece based on their own lives about gender-based violence, which is super taboo to talk about out there, especially. It's always been taboo, but they really went there. And they were so extraordinary. Yeah, so I had the ears of the State Department by then on issues that related to youth, to trauma, and to refugees specifically, and what their communities are going through specifically. Obviously, it's hard to recover from trauma if you're consistently being traumatized still.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the instability of asylum seeking is something that I think about a lot.
You've been in a lot of you've been in a lot of dangerous situations, Ming. And
well, this is the thing. They didn't feel dangerous.
I was going to ask. I mean, you've been in a lot of dangerous situations, and one of you know, when you're reading this refuge towards the beginning, where you're on the border between Turkey and Syria, and you're in this car with this cardiac a physician from the UK, and you're getting ready to go through the border, and all these things. I mean, come on. Were you not scared shitless, or what?
That was the one time I actually felt fear in my body, because the post-conflict context, is what I was working in Kenya, right? I'm in a slum, yeah, but it's Nairobi, it's daylight. That's when I'm out there working with these girls. Different from a checkpoint in an active military situation, right?
Yeah.
With Assad waiting to kill.
You didn't have any guards. You didn't have any security services along with you, or did you?
I have to give credit where credit is due. Basically, what I was going to say about the State Department, just sort of listening to what I was saying about development, is that I realized that the summer between Indiana's MFA and UCSB's PhD were these 2 or 3 months when I could go do what I do. And by then I had developed this rapport and started this group in Nairobi with the girls. And that put me close enough to Syria to think, you know, what if I just went at least nearby, maybe to Turkey, and wrote about and met refugees seeking asylum there and wrote a little bit about them. And so I started a Kickstarter, and Dr. Emery Slaughter has always been a super generous Twitter mentor. So she retweeted it a lot, and I got the support. And Ghazi Giroudi, who was doing humanitarian work on the ground in Syria, because it's where half his family's from, basically wrote to me and said, look, I am so glad you're doing this. I will make sure that you meet your goal so that you can get out here. What would you think about coming over the border with me? So
Wow.
he was very thorough. He was really
Sure.
responsible and awesome. And he's very much a California big brother kind of dude.
Yeah.
I have a big brother and he's just about his age. And he went to, Santa Rosa in the Bay. So he could totally just sort of jam, and we would say dude all the time. And but he also knew what he was doing out there and was connected to really good people. There
Yeah.
were some bad actors there that day in the refugee camp looking for ways to exploit my good intentions and my vulnerability. I was just really lucky not to be hooked up with one
Wow.
of them. I was hooked up with the good
Wow.
people.
Jeez, that's
It was
incredible. And
luck.
you even mentioned, ISIS here in your book, Refuge, that it was published really around the time where the whole idea of ISIS became, you even had to explain it, what it was. And it took over one of the refugee camps. Was that one of the camps that you were in at the time? After you were
No,
gone?
I only visited once.
Yeah.
It was called Optima,
Yeah.
and it was very, very close to the border. It was just a few hundred meters.
Yeah.
So part of me feels disingenuous saying I went to Syria. I did, but it was for a day, and we
Sure.
walked not
Yeah.
that far over the border.
Yeah.
The border crossing was scary. I mean, I did venture into a war zone, but it's not
Yeah.
the same as if I had been an embedded journalist in Damascus or
Sure.
anything.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense. Well, I worked in the Red Cross during my Great Migration in 2015 in the fall, and I was on the border between Austria and Slovenia. Anyway, I met amazing people from Damascus who were coming through, and I'm still friends with some of them on Facebook now. And
yeah,
just
that's one of the
just
best things is those friendships don't end.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's really quite amazing. And but then you mentioned also when you were in Ethiopia, you were in a mall a couple days before an attack. What was that
Well, that was in
timeline?
Kenya. That was in
Kenya.
Nairobi.
That's right, Kenya. Sorry.
Specifically, the Israeli-owned cafe where I would go to type up notes about Syria and about the work I was doing with the Survival Girls Theater Group. I would go there in the afternoons after working with the girls and just write up stuff. They had this
Why?
wonderful
Because they
grilled
had
halloumi
internet?
cheese.
Is it because they had internet connection? Is that why
Yeah,
you went?
yeah. Yeah,
There you go.
that's why. But it
Okay,
was
cool.
also that it was very verdant, and Nairobi can be kind of a gritty city, and I just really loved all the plants they had on the patio.
Yeah.
So I would order the same salad every day and get the work done. And 2 days later, that entire mall, specifically that cafe, was targeted in a super bloody 2 or 3 day hostage situation.
So how come you
So
weren't there?
I had flown to the United States like 17 hours before. I mean, it
Are
just,
you kidding me? That's insane.
yeah. So it's just luck. I've been in dangerous situations, but not at the time that they were dangerous, which means that they weren't dangerous. That's not the day that I forget what they're called. It's not Al-Shabaab, I think.
Yeah.
The military group that, yeah. I mean, tensions with Somalia and within Somalia have affected a lot of what happens in Nairobi, or at least had when I was there last.
And you wrote your chapter on Lenin where? Tell us.
Kind of like the Poughkeepsie of Russia, working class city called Syktyvkar, just west of the Urals, so just west of Siberia. And that was another time when I was just lucky. I guess I have a pretty good sense when I'm interacting with somebody in email, even whether they seem like good people. And it was a sustainable forestry organization, I learned I had gotten into Brown. I had gotten into Brown as a spring transfer. So I had one free semester. And my cousin, I got on the phone with my cousins and told them the news, and then told them when I was going in, and they said, a free semester is not a bad thing. Why don't you send emails? Everybody needs somebody who's good at English, who can do editing, who can do writing. It was already very clear that I was a writer. Apparently, my mother says that that was clear by the time I was 8. She's a school teacher, so she knew. And they just said, write to everybody, and just shake trees and see what happens. So I went to the World Wildlife Fund website and the Nature Conservancy website and cold emailed everybody with my little resume that had like 2 things on it because I was 18.
Yeah.
And this one response was positive and personal, and it was from a Polish guy called Przemyk, who lived in this Russian city, who was doing sustainable agriculture with a sort of subsidiary of a World Wildlife Fund umbrellaed NGO that was its own thing. It was just a bunch of Poles and Swedes teaching Russian people who weren't used to using their voice, especially indigenous communities in the forest, to have their cultural heritage respected. So they were bringing, these sort of liberal ideas into post-Soviet Russia. And then I just remembered that the email itself was something like, we would need visa, we would need, the home for you to sleep. And if we satisfy all the points, you are here. And that man, Przemyk, is so well loved. He's such a figurehead in that office. All of the employees loved him. He was like everybody's dad. And when I met him, he looks at me, he's a sort of old whiskered guy, kind of like an old owl, and he goes, "It was brave that you are here." Like, if you meet good people everywhere you go, you tend to have an open heart and think the best about people. And I've learned now that there are indeed evil people and sociopaths in the world, but really the only one who wasn't an American boyfriend.
Yeah, exactly. When did you learn? I was going to ask, when did you learn?
In Syria, like the guy in Syria with the bad eyes who was driving around, he definitely wanted to know what the deal was with me, and because he needed to get in between us and say she's with us. But pretty much, as I was mugged once in Mongolia, and this guy took me out, by sort of knocking me down, and I had a cut on my lip. But I think those are the 2 times I've ever felt in physical danger, really. Wow. Otherwise, it has been rewarding to have an open heart. And so it's just a question of rate of return, or rate of investment. What's that term? ROI?
Yeah, something like that.
You can tell I have 3 arts degrees. But if it had been more of a punishable thing in the world to have an open heart, if being out in the world and doing this work had been what had led to the greatest pain of my life, it might be a very different life. Yeah. But I just happened to have met wonderful people and had wonderful experiences, and it just kept happening. So I just thought, insofar as every person's life is a dialogue with the world and with whatever you believe your higher power or even just chance to be, whatever it is that you talk to when you are thinking, even if it's just a contract with yourself. I thought, as long as being open-hearted can produce these incredible situations and teach me this much, and I can be of service, I'll keep doing it. If it becomes too dangerous or the pain becomes too great from having an open heart and doing this work, I'll go do something else. But the world deserves for me to trust it if that trust has not been broken often enough for me to lose that faith. So I just kind of feel almost like it's a moral imperative of somebody, for someone with my privilege and my mobility. I have an American passport. I have vaccines. I even got my first Pfizer, when it's safe to do so. Now I've got a doctorate in trauma stuff. Yes. And a lot of experience working, with incarcerated youth and with refugees and other marginalized populations. And I just think as long as I am able and willing to do this work, there's a moral imperative to do it. And that's actually what I said in my Kickstarter video for Syria. That's how I felt back in 2013. I know people read my stuff. I know some of them work at the State Department. I know the refugee situation is really dire. The internally displaced person count is crazy in Syria because they can't get across the border to Turkey. So if I can, reasonably safely go, I'm going to do it because I must, because that's the moral imperative I see in the world, if that makes any sense. I've never tried to articulate that before, not out loud anyway.
You did a great job. What's the necklace you have on?
Oh, I just saw it actually today. It's my mother's, and I'm in my mother's room because that's where the Nice Desert View is. And she's got a sustainable agriculture seminar in the other room on her Zoom. So I'm in her room, and I just saw this, and I thought about the fact that we were going to do this interview, and I wanted to wear something of hers, because for me, quarantine, what I'm really going to love remembering besides the land and animals are just my parents. They were in their early 40s when I was born. Mom had been married 3 times. Dad was her 4th. I'm sure she'll love that I'm saying that on a podcast. And, both my parents are divorcees, and ours is a little bit of a blended family, and
Yeah.
having older parents is a different adventure. And I'm really glad I was here. Not because anything bad has happened, touch wood, but because something could have. Um,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I always felt, probably because my elder sister has 10 years on me, I always was a little bit envious that they got all that time with our parents. So
Sure.
I just thought, what better, as long as I had just gotten my doctorate and just finished my like crying tour of I went to every friend's couch in Europe that I could. And then I
Wow.
came home. It was a
What was
very
your,
budget trip.
what are some highlights of your European tour?
Oh my God. Um, well, I don't mind being open about this because it's a huge part of, turns out to be a huge part of my career, and what I value and what I think we need to be talking about right now. But I was suffering from some post-traumatic stress from interpersonal abuse. I had taken out a restraining order against an abusive ex, and who was insisting suddenly on going to school in my building, and had actually been enrolled at Duke, and decided to switch, after a stormy, public, embarrassing verbal assault on the beach where he broke up with me. I mean, the whole thing was the breakup that wouldn't stop. So I had spent the last year of my dissertation kind of under the radar and finishing later than expected with special funding, because it wasn't safe for me to be teaching on campus. And the university made a mistake. They didn't know that I had taken out a restraining order that was active against this man. And he had already technically been late admitted on a special case basis. Because a lot of these guys are real charmers. They're very intelligent. So I finished with a whole lot of heartbreak and sick to my stomach and shakiness, and having a doctorate in trauma stuff, that doesn't mean that we don't go through it. We just have more tools, those of us who have read up on it. And I knew what I needed. It's sort of the same thing. What are my skills? What are not my skills right now? And I just thought, I can't go into the workforce like this. I need to take just a couple months. But it turned out, when I met other people who had gotten their PhDs abroad, they said, oh yeah, take at least 4 months. It is a process. And at the end of it, you're tired. You're tired spiritually. You've just made a baby. You've been gestating this thing and answering to a lot of people's needs and requests on the dissertation committee and learning how to jump through the hoops. And you've just got to rest. So I actually went to Europe because a friend of mine from the year I worked in Mongolia also worked with refugees in Canberra in Australia. And she happened to be in Nice because it's where her husband and her 3 children, they all lived, on social welfare in France. He worked at the hospital. She does narrative therapy with refugees over Skype. And she could have been anywhere. She gave birth to her first daughter in Benin. I thought she was in Africa, actually, when I wrote to her. I just said, where are you in the world? And can I just come be sad at your house? I need someone who's worked with refugees and understands personal and trauma work writ large. I just want to be around you. Is that okay?
Wow.
And to her everlasting credit, she said yes. And also, I live on the French Riviera.
Exactly. What year was that? Because I was in France for a couple years recently. What year was that? Was that
Really? Where?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I was
in
there
France from,
November 2019 in Nice.
yeah, I was right. Yeah, I was up the like Toulouse, just north of Toulouse, so not so far.
Oh,
Although by the train it takes forever where I was near Bordeaux to get down to Nice. But
what were you
actually,
doing there?
wait, when were you in Nice exactly? What month? Or
November 2019 to December 2019, about 4 weeks.
yeah, December 2019.
Were you there?
I was there in Nice, December 2019. Yes, where they had
No
the Christmas.
way.
Yeah, I walked
You
from
were
the.
at the Christmas thing.
Yeah, yeah. I
I
remember.
went there like
I have
5
pictures on
times.
Facebook. I'll share them with you. That's so funny. I can't believe we were in the same city.
Wow. We probably were at that Christmas thing at the same time. I went like 5 times to get
Yeah.
presents.
I
got my
walked from the airport.
figurine.
Yeah, exactly. I went from the airport because I had a layover I was there for a day, and I took the train into Nice, which was actually quite convenient. Did you notice how awesome it is to fly did you fly into Nice, or did you take the train from Paris? So
I flew in.
yeah, isn't it amazing? You just get off the airplane and you literally walk outside and you get on the nice little tram that takes you all the way through Nice. It's amazing.
Oh yeah. And I also remember taking the train to Antibes, where there was a holistic trauma therapist that Po took me to. And just, it was the winter, like it was really amazing to do all these touristy sort of things and be in these gorgeous places in the off season. Like Antibes is this incredible, I'm sure in the summer it's packed, but instead it was this very quiet, gorgeous, and I just remember the waves were really moody that day and they were crashing, at the end of the sea. And my parents mentioned, we've never seen you go somewhere like easy, like French Riviera.
Yeah.
Just me, instead of going somewhere hard to do work. So we're glad you're doing this. And it was really something. There was no way I could get out of feeling really awful. That's part of healing, is allowing yourself to feel really bad until the feeling has been felt. And then it leaves usually of its own accord.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I got to be sad on the streets of Paris. After Nice, I got to go beagle sit for my friend from college in Montmartre while she visited family in England. What am I looking at?
You're looking at my boarding pass from Helsinki to Nice, December. Can you see that?
15th.
Yeah. Were you there? December 15th?
Yeah, I didn't leave until the 21st.
Oh my God, that is so awesome.
I'm serious, man. We probably like walked past each other in front of those little wooden housey things with all of the what's that? Is it galette? No. The that French drunk food.
Oh yeah.
Raclette.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I spent the whole day at the beach, and I just like the boardwalk, you remember where all the Christmas things were, and you walk right straight out to the boardwalk.
Beach.
Yeah, I was there, like just like in the sun. I was just in Helsinki for a week, and I was just like in the sun in Nice in December.
Wow. How cold was Helsinki?
Oh, it was really cold. Like it was insanely cold. But then Nice that day was just wonderful. It was like 65 Fahrenheit, like 18 degrees centigrade. And the sun radiated, and you just drink a little cup of martinis with the sun, and you're perfect.
Yeah, that's when Poland is an incredible narrative therapist, and she's raising 3 young kids, and they were like 2, 6, and 9 or something, very full on. And she still took the time when I first got there to take me to the boardwalk and have a drink with me, out. We were wearing sunglasses in November.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was really something. And then I went and beagle sat in Montmartre and spent Christmas and New Year in like downstairs from Sacré-Cœur. And I got to go to the Christmas Mass, which was an extraordinary experience. So, I was going to feel like shit, but I was going to feel like shit in beautiful places. So we kept having cry on her couch. So I cried on Poe's couch in Nice. I cried in Montmartre with the beagle every day, and went to Sacré-Cœur for the Christmas Mass. And then I got an Instagram message from a young woman I used to babysit, who said, "Are you in Paris right now?" And I said, "Kiana, how old are you?" And she's like, "I'm 23. I just graduated Johns Hopkins. And I was on a birthright trip to Israel, and my boyfriend broke up with me. Want to come with me in his place to Greece?" And I said, she said, "I'm going to be in Paris in 2 days. My aunt lives there. I'm going to stay with her for a few days and then go to Greece. Why don't you come?" And it was exactly the day that the house sitting ended in January 2020. So Kiana and I did that. And then I felt very sad, at the top of this beautiful, little fort in Greece, and talked to the spirits there, And,
where in Greece did you go? Because I lived in Greece for a year.
I'm going to butcher the name, I fear. I want to say Napolitano, but that's Italian.
Oh, okay. So
Nafrio.
Yeah, that's a beautiful town. Nafrio, it's near Sparta.
Peloponnesian Islands, right?
Yeah, and you go by Corinth. So it's actually a long drive from Athens to get there. But when you're there, it's a beautiful, charming city. And remember off in the, just a bit out into the sea, it's like where the prisoners used to be. Remember how they put the prisoners? Do you remember? I wrote a novella in Naflia.
No way.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I was actually in the moment when my novella turned into a novel. Yeah.
Of course it did, because you're you. But
Yeah.
what was funny is that Kiana and I spent the night with her aunt and uncle, you know, in upscale Paris, and we had oysters to celebrate. We were both, you know, getting out of these really painful romantic relationships. So it's just fun to connect as adults on that level with her.
Yeah.
And then we got to Athens and promptly puked for 12 hours because the oysters had given us gastroenteritis.
What? Are you
So we were
joking? I've never.
Airbnb in Athens, and Kiana's puking in the toilet, and I realize I'm T-minus 3 seconds. I'm going to puke too. So I run out to the balcony, and there are cats everywhere below me on the other balcony. So I'm like aiming my projectile vomit to try not to hit the neighbors, you know, potted plants, but also not to hit the cats. And, you know, it was just a wonderful, we decided that we were witches who got to Greece and immediately purged. But so I didn't see very much of Athens. I think we went to the Acropolis and talked about Bluebeard and you know, like gender-based violence and the Bluebeard myth and stuff. And then we were on a bus to Nafplio and spent the rest of the time there. And it was kind of like Antibes in that it was a gorgeous city in its off season. So it was wonderfully quiet and fairly cold for the region.
Yeah.
But it kind of suited me, you know. I kept feeling really guilty that I felt so terrible, but I also understood that there wasn't any other way to feel, you know. So it was interesting because I went to all these tourist friendly places after spending well over 30 years going to all these non-tourist friendly places. And I was much happier in the latter countries, but I think there's a special, very privileged experience of being heartbroken in Europe in these beautiful places too.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to remember that. My friend George Daz Green started the Moss Storytelling Collective, and I remember feeling heartbroken in New York City in my mid-20s by some other asshole. And he goes, Ming, isn't the whole world more vivid right now though? You know, like, aren't you remembering things on the subway and the color of the sun and what you are eating and how you can't really eat it? Like, those are all important. Those are all memories.
Absolutely.
And the same thing happened in Russia. I remember that was my very first heartbreak, right? I think any of us who haven't been married our entire adult lives have had more than one broken heart. And I just remember that the birches in the river felt like they were imprinting on my mind even more strongly because of that. So it's, you know, I think refuge is about external issues and international stuff and refugee work, but it's also kind of about, you know, how our senses can take care of us. There's a very Tatacho animated spirit to the book where you know, you realize that the ocean and other things are your friends. They're there for you. Well, I mean, quarantine life, man. You get cats, you get parents, and of course, I was like, yes, I'm going to talk to Creston. It's going to be daylight. I'm going to be awake. Dad's not going to have a headache. It's going to I was really pumped. And then Mom goes, I have a regenerative agriculture course. And I was like, oh no, let's hope this works. But I refuse to postpone anymore. I've been looking forward to this conversation for months.